The night Céleste Beaumont couldn't get a cab in the rain was the same night she realized she had never once in her 44 years stood in the rain without someone holding an umbrella over her head. She stood outside the Glass and Cedar restaurant on Michigan Avenue, the December wind cutting through the wool of her coat like it had somewhere to be, her driver not answering, her assistant already off the clock and 31 floors above her, the private dining room she'd booked for tonight's board dinner sitting empty because half the board had canceled by noon and the other half had sent their regrets by 3. Merry Christmas. The season of goodwill. Céleste had built Beaumont Capital from a 2-room office in Evanston into a $47 billion asset management firm. She had been on the cover of Bloomberg Business Week twice. She had shaken hands with 4 presidents. She had also, apparently, forgotten how to stand in the rain like a normal person because she was standing very still on the sidewalk with her hand out and not a single cab was slowing down. A woman in a down parka bumped her shoulder without looking back. A teenager nearly knocked her purse from her arm. Somewhere to her left, a street musician was playing "O Holy Night" on a violin that was slightly out of tune, and Céleste Beaumont, for reasons she would later not be able to explain entirely, felt something press up against the inside of her chest like a fist. She had been fine all day. She had been fine for the better part of 3 years, ever since her divorce from Thomas, ever since she stopped pretending their Kenilworth house was a home and started calling it what it actually was, an investment property with good bones. She had been fine. She turned and went inside the restaurant. Not her private dining room. The main floor. The warm, noisy, Christmas-lit main floor where every table was full, and the host stand had a handwritten sign that said, "Fully booked. Happy holidays." And she almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Céleste Beaumont, fully booked out of a restaurant she could have purchased 6 times over. She was about to turn around again when she heard it. She looked sad. It was a small voice, coming from somewhere below her elbow. She looked down. A girl, maybe 7, maybe 8, with 2 braids and a red velvet dress and a gap where her 2 front teeth used to be, was looking straight up at her with the unfiltered honesty that only children and very drunk people ever manage. "Nadia." A man's voice, low and immediately embarrassed. That's not polite. Céleste looked up. The man was in his mid-30s, maybe 40, wearing a blazer that was slightly too big in the shoulders, in the way that suggests a man who doesn't often wear blazers. He had warm brown eyes and the particular expression of a father who has given up on dignity for the evening. He was sitting at a table for 4 with only 2 place settings used and 1 empty chair with a child's coat draped over it. "I'm sorry," he said to Céleste. "She's very—" He paused. "Honest." "She's not wrong," Céleste heard herself say. There was a beat of silence. The violinist outside hit a high note that quavered. The girl named Nadia tugged on the man's sleeve. "Daddy, invite her." "Nadia, you always say Christmas is for sharing." The man looked at Céleste with an expression that was equal parts mortified and resigned, the look of someone who has just been outmaneuvered by a second grader and knows it. "We have an empty seat," he said carefully. "If you'd like to, you don't have to. Are you a Christmas elf?" Nadia asked Céleste. "No," Céleste said. "You look like one. Your coat is green." "It's forest," Céleste said. "It's called forest," Céleste said. "It's called forest." Nadia considered this with great seriousness. "I like forest," she decided. Céleste Beaumont, who had not shared a dinner table with strangers since a conference in Zurich in 2019, sat down. The man's name was Garrett Okafor. He was 38 years old, a high school history teacher at Lincoln Prep on the north side, and he had brought his daughter to Glass and Cedar tonight because it had been his late wife's favorite restaurant, and Nadia had asked 3 times in November alone if they could go somewhere Mama used to love. He told Céleste none of this in the first 10 minutes. What he told her, carefully, while Nadia studied the dessert menu with the focused intensity of a general planning a campaign, was that they came downtown every Christmas Eve, and that the restaurant had been kind enough to fit them in, and that he hoped she didn't mind the company. "I don't mind," Céleste said. And then, because she was not used to leaving sentences incomplete, I've been eating alone for 3 years. Garrett looked at her in the way that people do when you've said something more honest than expected. Not with pity. She'd had enough of that in the months after the divorce, the careful lunch invitations, the delicate inquiries, but with something more like recognition. Me too, he said. 2.5. She understood then about the wife. She didn't ask. He didn't ask her. He didn't elaborate. They both reached for the breadbasket at the same time and then laughed, a small, surprised sound, and Nadia looked up from the dessert menu long enough to say, "That's funny," before going back to her very serious business. The evening moved in the way that good evenings sometimes do, not quickly, not slowly, but with a kind of ease that Celeste had forgotten was possible. Nadia told her about second grade and her best friend Priya and the Christmas pageant where she had played a shepherd and tripped on her robe in front of everyone, and how she had decided the best response was to bow, so she bowed and everyone clapped, and now she wanted to be an actress. Garrett watched his daughter with a quiet, steady attention that Celeste noticed the way you notice something beautiful that isn't performing for you. She ordered the salmon. Nadia ordered the pasta with butter and spent several minutes explaining to the waiter that she wanted the normal butter, not the fancy butter. Garrett had the short rib and apologized 3 times for the child's running commentary on other diners' hairstyles. The lady at the corner table, Nadia stage whispered, has a bun like a cinnamon roll. Nadia, it's a compliment, Daddy. I love cinnamon rolls. Celeste hid her smile in her water glass. When Garrett went to the restroom somewhere around the appetizers, Nadia immediately leaned forward on her elbows in that conspiratorial way of children who understand that adults are briefly unavailable. "Do you have kids?" she asked. "No," Celeste said. "Do you have a husband?" "Not anymore." Nadia nodded slowly. "My daddy doesn't have a wife anymore either." She said it with the careful, measured weight of a child who has rehearsed saying difficult things. "She went to heaven 2 Christmases ago." "I'm so sorry," Celeste said, and meant it in a way she hadn't meant anything in a while. "Daddy says she's still here, though," Nadia said. "He says she's in the wind, and in my laugh, and in the way I like strawberries." She paused. "I eat a lot of strawberries." Celeste didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that wouldn't diminish it. Nadia studied her with those clear, unsentimental eyes. "You should smile more," she said, not unkindly. "You have a nice one." Garrett came back, and Nadia immediately shifted back to the dessert menu, as if none of it had happened. And Celeste sat very still for a moment, feeling something she couldn't quite name, like a window had been opened in a room that had been shut too long. She didn't give them her card. That was the thing she thought about later. Her first instinct, by the end of the meal, had been to reach into her bag and pull out the small cream-colored card that said Céleste Beaumont, Beaumont Capital, and offer it to this man the way she offered everything. As a resource, a door, a thing that could be used. She'd caught herself, put the bag back on her chair. They exchanged numbers like regular people. Clumsily, Nadia announcing the digits of her father's phone, while Garrett said, "Nadia, that's not okay, fine." In the cab home, she had managed a cab this time. Celeste sat with her phone in her lap and did not text. She was not a woman who texted first. She was not a woman who had texted first since roughly 2003. She texted, "Thank you for the seat. Merry Christmas." He responded 12 minutes later, "Merry Christmas." "Nadia wants to know if you're free for the Lincoln Park Zoo lights next Saturday." I told her I'd ask. Celeste looked at that message for a long time. She typed, "I'll check my schedule." She hadn't had anything on her schedule next Saturday for 6 weeks. She went. Of course she went. Lincoln Park in December, with a 7-year-old who treated every illuminated animal sculpture as a personal acquaintance, was a different thing entirely from Céleste Beaumont's usual December, which involved quarterly reports and a standing dinner reservation she ate through alone. Nadia narrated the entire path through the lights with the confidence of a very small tour guide. "That's Gerald," she told Celeste, gesturing at a glowing polar bear. "He's shy but friendly." "How do you know his name is Gerald?" It's obvious, Nadia said, and moved on to a luminous giraffe she called Priscilla. Garrett walked beside Celeste with his hands in his pockets and a knit hat pulled low, and they talked in the easy half-sentences of people who are keeping one eye on a child and one on each other, about the neighborhood, about where Celeste had grown up. Evanston, which Nadia declared very far away, about the history elective Garrett was teaching in January on the Great Migration. 7th and 8th graders, Celeste asked. 10th, I love the juniors. They still think history is interesting. The seniors have mostly figured out it's going to be on a test. Nadia doubled back to inform them that Priscilla the giraffe was actually, upon reflection, named Celestine. That's very close to my name, Celeste said. Nadia looked at her with immense satisfaction. I know, she said. January came and they kept seeing each other. Not in any way that was announced or defined, but in the way things happen when two people keep finding reasons to be in the same room. Coffee while Nadia was at her Saturday art class. A Sunday afternoon at the Natural History Museum that Nadia insisted on and that Garrett and Celeste spent mostly standing next to each other in front of a diorama of the African savanna, saying very little while Nadia explained the social dynamics of a pride of lions with alarming accuracy. Celeste started to notice the things she did, the way she offered to cover the museum membership since you're here so often, and the way Garrett's face shifted, careful and polite, but with something underneath it. He declined. She noticed that. She bought Nadia a coat, a good one, the kind Celeste knew how to buy, warm and well-made, because she'd seen the girl shivering at the bus stop outside the art school when she'd driven past one Saturday. She left it with a note and had it dropped at the school. Garrett called her that evening. Not a text. A call. Celeste, he said, and just from the way he said her name she could hear it. You can't do that. The coat? It's not just anything. I know you mean well. His voice was quiet and measured, which made it worse somehow than if he'd been angry. But we're not a project. Nadia's not something to fix. We're doing fine. I didn't think. I know you didn't. A pause. That's the part I'm trying to tell you about. She sat with that for a long time after she hung up. The apartment was very quiet. She had a 4,000-square-foot apartment on the Gold Coast, and she was sitting in the kitchen at 11 o'clock at night, listening to the refrigerator hum and thinking about how Garrett Okorafor had just told her the truth about herself in 4 sentences, gently, without a single cruel word. She had spent 44 years solving things. Problems, portfolios, people. It was what she did. It was, she was realizing as she sat in her kitchen, almost the only thing she knew how to do. She didn't hear from him for 3 weeks. She did not call. She wanted to. There were several evenings when she picked up her phone and put it back down and went to make tea. She didn't drink. She thought about Nadia naming a giraffe after her. She thought about Garrett's face in the restaurant, watching his daughter, that unguarded, steady look. She also thought about what it would mean to show up again the same way, reaching for her checkbook, reaching for her contacts, for the things she could offer that wasn't just herself. She had been reaching her whole life. She was very tired of it now that she thought about it. She hadn't known she was tired of it until she stopped. Her friend Camille, who taught literature at Northwestern and had known Celeste since college, came over for dinner in late January and listened to all of this with the particular attention of someone who is not surprised. You know what your problem is? Camille said. I have several. You think love is a transaction. Camille said it without cruelty, the way you say something to an old friend that you've been holding for years. You do something, someone does something back. It balances, but he's not interested in balancing. He's a person. He wants you to be one too. Celeste was quiet. When did you stop being one? Camille asked. I don't know, Celeste said. Sometime in my 30s, I think. It's hard to say. She started volunteering in February. Not at a gala, not at a fundraiser where her name would be on a program. She had done plenty of that, and it had cost her nothing that mattered. She started at a reading program at the Woodlawn Community Center Wednesday evenings, 2 hours. First and second graders who were behind on their reading levels and came in with the slightly defensive posture of children who have already figured out that school is a place where certain kinds of kids get told they're slow. The first night, a boy named Marcus refused to read aloud at all. He sat with his arms crossed and looked at a point somewhere above her left shoulder. "You don't have to read to me," Celeste said. "You can read to him." She put a picture book on the table between them. "His name's Chester. He's a dog. He doesn't care if you miss a word." Marcus looked at the book. He looked at her. He picked it up. She did not tell Garrett about this. That was important. She noticed it was important. She didn't want him to know because she wasn't doing it for him to know. She was sitting on a bench in Douglas Park in March, eating a sandwich alone on her lunch break because her 12:30 had canceled when her phone rang. Garrett's name on the screen. She answered. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. "Hi," she said. A pause. Not uncomfortable. A pause with some weather in it. "Nadia lost her other front tooth," he said. "She's very pleased with herself. She should be." Another pause. "I've been thinking," he said. I think I was unfair to you, not in what I said, but in how I said it, and then just left." "You weren't unfair." "I was a little unfair." "A little," she allowed. She could hear him smile through the phone. She had not known before this year that you could hear a person smile. "I'm teaching a unit on the Harlem Renaissance in April," he said. "Nadia is convinced you know everything about art because you have a fancy apartment. I told her that's not how it works. She doesn't believe me." "My apartment is not that fancy," Celeste said. She saw a photo in the background of a video call and identified a painting on your wall as, quote, "definitely famous." "It's a Romare Bearden print," Celeste said. "She's not wrong." Garrett laughed. It was a real laugh, not polite, and Celeste held on to it. "Would you want to come to the Art Institute?" he said. "The three of us. I'm not calling it anything, but Nadia would like it, and I would like it, and we'd all probably be better off with a child present, so no one has to decide what it is." Celeste looked at Douglas Park, at the bare March trees beginning to show the first cautious green at their edges. "Yes," she said. They went on a Saturday in April. Nadia moved through the Impressionists with the sovereign authority she brought to most things, offering opinions no one had solicited, and several of the plaques seemed to contradict. She stopped for a very long time in front of a small painting of a woman reading, alone, absorbed, her back to the viewer, and said nothing, which was unusual enough that both Garrett and Celeste stopped walking. "She looks peaceful," Nadia said finally. "She does," Garrett said. Nadia looked at Celeste. "You look like that sometimes now," she said. "Peaceful. You didn't before." Celeste didn't know what to say. Garrett found her hand in the quiet of the gallery and held it without ceremony, the way people do when they're not performing anything for anyone, and Nadia had already moved on to argue with the interpretive text about a Monet, May, and then June, the easy accumulation of an ordinary life that turns out to be extraordinary. Coffee on Sunday mornings at a place in Andersonville that Nadia approved of because they put extra whipped cream on the hot chocolate without being asked. A 4th of July on the lakefront with Camille and her husband and Garrett's neighbor Bernard, who was 72 and brought a folding chair and strong opinions about the fireworks. Nadia fell asleep against Celeste's shoulder at 10:15, mid-sentence, and Celeste sat very still for a long time, not moving. She called her mother in September. Her mother lived in Phoenix, and they spoke monthly and carefully, the way families do when love has always been slightly easier at a distance. She didn't tell her mother everything, but she told her enough that her mother was quiet for a moment and then said, "You sound different." "I think I am," Celeste said. "Different how?" "Slower," she said. "Like I've stopped running for something." Her mother was quiet again. "Then what were you running for all this time?" Celeste didn't have a good answer. She'd been running for the next thing, the bigger number, the proof that she had earned her place on the ground she stood on. And somewhere in a restaurant on Michigan Avenue, on a December night, a gap-toothed girl in a red velvet dress had pointed at her and said she looked sad, and it had been the truest thing anyone had said to her in years. Christmas came again. The year had turned its whole circle. Garrett made dinner at his apartment, his actual cooking, not takeout, which turned out to be surprisingly good jollof rice and roasted chicken and a sweet potato pie from his mother's recipe that Nadia stood next to protectively for the entire last half hour before dinner, as though someone might try to steal it. Celeste brought wine and a book for Nadia and nothing else. She had thought about this carefully. She had bought 3 things and returned all 3 of them and shown up with a book she'd read twice herself and thought Nadia was ready for. After dinner, after dishes, after Nadia had made it 40 minutes into a Christmas movie before the evening caught up with her, and she went under on the couch with the boneless certainty of a child who trusts the room she's in. Garrett and Celeste sat at the kitchen table with the last of the wine, and the comfortable mess of a holiday meal and the sound of a cartoon still playing softly from the living room. "You know what Nadia told me last week?" Garrett said. "Tell me." "She said she thinks you're her Christmas present." He looked at Celeste over his glass. From her mom. Celeste pressed her lips together. The kitchen was warm and smelled like nutmeg, and there was a small Nadia-made ornament on the window above the sink, a paper star slightly lopsided that said "Merry Christmas" in purple crayon. "That's the most." She stopped. Started again. "That might be the most important thing anyone has ever said about me." Garrett reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "She's not wrong," he said. "You're kind of hard to argue with when she gets going. She gets that from you. She absolutely does not get that from me." They were still laughing quietly when Nadia stirred on the couch and said, half asleep, "I can hear you being happy." Garrett and Celeste looked at each other across the kitchen table, in the warm light, in the good mess of a life being lived rather than managed, and didn't say anything, because there was nothing left that needed saying. Some things come to us not when we go looking for them, but when we finally stop blocking the door. Céleste Beaumont had 44 years of holding doors shut. It only took one rainy December night, one empty cab, one impossible table, one honest little girl to teach her what it means to let something in. If you're out there holding a door shut tonight, maybe ask yourself what you're so afraid of on the other side. It might just be everything you were looking for.